Poor rancher married the obese stranger only for the ranch, but she shocked him like he'd never been. The church smelled of old wood and candle wax as the rancher stood tall in his weather-worn vest, staring into the eyes of the woman who had agreed to marry him. He hadn't wanted this, not truly. He needed her dowry, the money and the acres of fertile land her family had left her. To him, it was a practical arrangement, a means to keep his cattle fed and his debts at bay. She held a bouquet of flowers, her cheeks flushed with both nerves and quiet defiance. He expected a meek bride, one who would fade into the background of his rugged life. Instead, he saw fire in her eyes, something untamed, something that warned him this union would not go as he had planned. Later that night, the lantern glowed between them as they sat inside the cabin, the map of his ranch spread across the table. He leaned on it with calloused hands, explaining where the river bent, where the cattle grazed, where the fences needed repair. He spoke sharply, as though he needed her to understand this was a business deal, nothing more. She stood quietly behind him at first, her hands folded, her gaze steady. Then, when he dismissed her input, she stepped forward, her voice firm yet calm, and pointed out where the land could be better managed, where her late father had always said water would one day flow if dug out properly. He froze. How could she know? He had walked this land all his life, yet she saw something he'd overlooked. A flicker of respect, though begrudging, sparked in him. Days passed, and their bond was tested beneath the weight of expectation. On their wedding journey back from town, the wagon jolted across uneven trails. She wore her dress still, her veil tucked beneath her bonnet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. He sat beside her, the leather reins gripped tightly in his hands. He glanced at her, this stranger who now bore his name, and wondered why she did not complain about the dust or the long ride. Instead, she gazed out at the horizon, lips pressed tight but her eyes soft, as though she carried secrets the prairie itself whispered to her. He realized then she was not the fragile burden he had assumed. She carried her weight with a quiet dignity that unsettled him. Back at the chapel where the community gathered again, they walked hand in hand. The crowd clapped and smiled, though he felt the burn of whispers about him marrying for land, about her size, about appearances that didn't match the fairy tale. He braced himself against shame, expecting her to look small under their scrutiny. Instead, she lifted her chin, her face glowing with a warmth he did not deserve. She smiled at him, as though none of the muttering mattered. The applause swelled louder, no longer mocking but celebratory, and in that moment, he realized she had turned judgment into triumph simply by refusing to bow to it. One evening, as stars embroidered the sky, they sat on the porch of their cabin. He had poured them both a drink, expecting silence. But she laughed softly at something, a story she told about her childhood, about chasing chickens across her family's yard until she fell face first into the mud. Her laughter was full, alive, unashamed. For the first time in years, he laughed too. Their mugs clinked together in the dim lamplight, and the air between them shifted. The woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a key to land was now the reason his heart raced. The rancher had married her for survival, but she gave him something deeper, perspective, resilience, and an unexpected tenderness. She shocked him not with the weight he once judged, but with the strength of her spirit and the way she carried both herself and him when he stumbled. The land she brought was valuable, yes, but it was her courage, her fire, and her laughter that made him realize he had gained far more than he ever bargained for. The mugs touched softly in the night air, and the rancher watched her eyes glimmer in the faint starlight. She wasn't what he expected, not in the least. He had imagined silence, perhaps timid compliance. Instead, she gave him laughter. She gave him warmth he hadn't realized his home had been starved of. For a long moment, he forgot about debts, forgotten about whispers, forgotten even about the weight of responsibility that had nearly crushed him. He saw only her shoulders shaking with mirth, her golden hair spilling loose under the porch lantern, her smile not meant to please but simply to exist. He leaned back, mug balanced in his hand, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. She turned her gaze to the night sky, her lips parted as though she wanted to speak. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated, then said softly, "I know why you married me." His jaw tightened. The words landed like stones in the quiet. For weeks now, he had avoided the truth in conversation. She continued, not with bitterness, but with startling calm. You needed the land. You needed what I could give. And I needed someone who wouldn't let it go to waste. Her eyes shifted to him. I wasn't blind to the deal, you see. But I hoped, maybe, that something more might grow. Her honesty disarmed him. He sat silent, trying to gather the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Finally, he said, and what if it doesn't? She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with something unshed. Then I will still have given you what you needed. That's enough for me. His throat burned with words he didn't know how to release. He thought of her resilience, of her steady presence, of the way she had handled the gossip at the chapel without flinching. He thought of her laugh, of her knowledge of the land. He thought of the way she filled the emptiness in this cabin simply by being here. The days stretched into weeks, and the ranch tested them both. Fences broke, storms rolled across the plains, and cattle went missing in the hills. She rose early with him, not content to sit inside. She fed the chickens, cooked meals, patched clothes, and when he went out to ride the boundaries, she walked the creek beds, studying where the soil was richest, where new shoots pushed up through the earth. He watched her once from a distance, her dress caught by the wind, her hands in the dirt. She looked less like the woman he married for a bargain and more like a partner tied to the land itself. One evening, he found her with a spade, digging carefully where the ground dipped low. "What are you doing?" he asked, dismounting his horse. She wiped her brow and pointed. "There's water here. My father told me about it once, though he never had the chance to dig. If we open it, the cattle will never go thirsty again." He crouched down, skeptical. But when he pushed his hand into the earth, he felt it, cool, damp, promising. He looked up at her, and for the first time, admiration broke through the guardedness in his chest. "You were right," he murmured. She smiled, not triumphantly but with quiet satisfaction. As the weeks passed, whispers in town grew softer. Folks who had once laughed at him for marrying her began to notice the changes on the ranch. The cattle grew stronger, the fields greener. He felt the weight of gossip lifting, though part of him no longer cared. What he cared about was the way she hummed while cooking supper, the way her hair caught fire in the sunset, the way she carried herself with a dignity that no insult could stain. Still, he fought it. The old stubbornness in him, the pride, that had built walls high and thick around his heart, made him resist. Until the night he saw her crying. He came in from the barn, boots heavy with dust, and found her by the table. She tried to hide it, but her shoulders trembled. "What's wrong?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired." But he wasn't blind anymore. He stepped closer. "Don't lie to me." Her hands clenched at her apron. "I know I'm not the woman you wanted. I hear it in the way you talk. I see it in the way you look at me sometimes. I thought maybe you were starting to see me. But maybe I was wrong." The words cut him deeper than any blade. He stood there, struggling, his chest tight. Finally, he reached out, his rough hands closing over hers. "You're right," he whispered. "I didn't want this. Not at first. I married you for the land, for the cattle, for everything but you." But, his voice broke, and he forced himself to meet her eyes. "But you've given me more than land. You've given me life again. I don't know how to say it without failing at the words." Her tears slipped freely then, but so did her smile. She leaned into him, and for the first time, he held her not as a bargain, not as a stranger, but as his wife. The months turned into seasons, and the ranch flourished under their combined strength. Together, they fought drought and flood, sickness and scarcity. Together, they built something that was not only theirs but also a testament to resilience and unexpected love. In town, people no longer whispered about the poor rancher who married the obese stranger. They spoke of the couple who turned struggling soil into thriving pasture, of the woman whose knowledge saved the herd, of the man who once thought he'd taken a bride for necessity but found himself transformed by her. At night, on the porch beneath the stars, they shared stories and laughter. Sometimes silence too, but it was the silence of comfort, of two souls no longer strangers but bound by the earth they worked and the love that had taken root. And every time he looked at her now, he no longer saw the bargain he had struck. He saw the gift he had been given, one that had shocked him like nothing else ever had. The nights grew colder as autumn pressed into the land. The rancher had grown used to her presence now, so much so that when she wasn't in sight, he felt something gnaw inside him. One morning, before the sun had risen, he stirred awake to find the bed empty. Panic rushed through him. He pulled on his boots and rushed outside, expecting trouble. He found her by the barn, her figure outlined by the faint glow of dawn. She was milking one of the cows, her breath puffing in the chill air. He stood there for a moment, watching her. The way she worked without complaint, the way she moved with calm determination, it struck him how much she belonged here. "You shouldn't be up so early," he said, his voice rough with sleep. She looked up, smiling softly. "And leave it all to you." "I don't think so." He crouched beside her, taking over the pail. Their hands brushed, and something inside him sparked like flint against steel. She looked at him, and he saw the warmth there, the forgiveness, the trust he had not yet earned but desperately wanted to. He cleared his throat, masking the storm in his chest, and finished the chore. By the time winter's first snow came, the rancher realized he had started to lean on her, not just for work, but for everything. When storms blew across the plains, she calmed him with quiet words. When cattle fell sick, she nursed them without hesitation. When debts pressed, she reminded him of the water they had found, of the fertile spring that would save their herds in seasons to come. But with the snow also came danger. One evening, as the wind howled like wolves across the land, a rider came pounding to their door. "Trouble at the river," the man shouted. The rancher saddled his horse immediately, but before he left, she grabbed his hand. "You can't face this alone. I have to," he said firmly. "It's too dangerous." But she wouldn't release him. "If you go down there without help, you'll drown in the ice. Let me ride with you." He shook his head, but her eyes burned with determination. He knew then she wasn't asking, she was insisting. Together they rode into the storm, the snow stinging their faces, the horses struggling against the wind. When they reached the river, they saw it, cattle caught against the broken ice, their lowing cries carried on the freezing air. He leapt into the water, rope in hand, and nearly went under with the current. She threw herself onto the bank, bracing her weight, pulling the rope with all her strength. They hauled one steer out, then another, until at last the herd staggered to safety. By the time they returned home, soaked and half frozen, he collapsed against the fire, shivering uncontrollably. She wrapped him in blankets, her arms firm around him, her lips pressed to his temple. "You fool," she whispered, tears hot against his cheek. "Do you think I'd let you die for cattle? Not when I just started to love you." The words pierced him. He looked up, stunned. Her face was open, vulnerable, trembling with the weight of what she had confessed. Something inside him broke free. He pulled her close, holding her as though he'd never let go. "I thought I didn't deserve love," he whispered. "But you gave it anyway." That night changed everything. The walls he had built crumbled, and he let her see him, his fears, his regrets, his failures. She listened without judgment, her hand always steady in his. In return, he gave her what she had longed for, not just acknowledgement, but devotion. He began to see her not as a stranger who shocked him, but as the heartbeat of the life he never thought he'd have. Spring returned, and with it, prosperity. Their herd grew fat on the water-fed grass. The ranch thrived in ways it never had before. Townsfolk, once cruel with whispers, now looked on them with respect. Men tipped their hats to her, women sought her counsel, children ran to greet her when she came into town. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she stood beside him at the edge of their land. The fields glowed gold, the cattle grazing peacefully. She slipped her hand into his, and he felt the calluses of her palms, earned from work, from survival, from the life they had built together. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly. He turned to her, confused. "Regret what?" "Marrying me." Her voice was quiet, but there was fear hidden in it, the fear that perhaps, deep down, she was still just the bargain he made. He cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. "I regret one thing only, that I didn't see you sooner. That I didn't realize from the first day that you were the greatest gift of my life." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, and in that smile he saw the truth. They had both been broken, both been judged, both been dismissed. But together, they had remade each other. The years stretched on, filled with hardship and triumph, but through it all, they stood side by side. When storms came, they held each other fast. When drought threatened, they fought it together. When laughter came, it was shared. And every night, under the same stars where they once clinked mugs in tentative peace, they clinked them again, not as strangers, not as a bargain, but as soulmates who had defied expectation. He had married her for the ranch. She had married him to preserve what her family left. But what neither had expected was the love that grew between them, fierce as wildfire, steady as the land itself. And that love shocked him in a way nothing else ever could. The spring air was heavy with the scent of wildflowers when the rancher woke before dawn. He stretched in bed and reached to his side, finding only the faint warmth left where his wife had been. She was already up, as she so often was now, her presence woven into every corner of the ranch. He threw on his clothes and stepped outside, where the horizon was just beginning to bleed light into the sky. He spotted her in the garden near the barn, sleeves rolled high, her hands dirty as she pressed seeds into the soil. "You're out here before the rooster," he called, his voice still thick with sleep. She looked up with a smile, brushing hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "The earth doesn't wait for men to wake. It listens to the sun." He walked over, crouching beside her. For a moment, he simply watched. There was a rhythm to her hands, a grace in her movements. He had seen her as strong before, but lately he saw something more, an intimacy with the land, as though the soil responded to her touch. He reached out and covered her wrist with his rough palm. "You've made this place alive," he murmured. She met his gaze, her eyes soft. "We did, together." The word struck deep in his chest. Together. For months now, they had worked side by side, and every small triumph had bound them tighter. Yet there was still a part of him that carried the shadow of their beginning, the shame that he had once seen her only as a bargain. He wrestled with it quietly, even as his love for her deepened. Later that day, he saddled his horse for a ride along the far fence line. She joined him, riding astride with surprising ease. The trail wound past the creek, past fields where the grass now grew thick and green from the water she had unearthed. "You know," he said, glancing at her, "when you first spoke about finding water here, I thought you were reaching for miracles. And now," she teased. He smiled. "Now I think you were the miracle." She laughed, and the sound carried across the prairie like birdsong. He wanted to freeze the moment, to hold it forever, but life on the ranch had no patience for stillness. Trouble arrived that evening in the form of 3 men on horseback, riding hard into the yard. Their hats were pulled low, their faces sharp with intent. The rancher stepped onto the porch as they reined in. "What do you want?" he demanded. The tallest man spat into the dirt. "Your cattle have been straying into our land. We've lost grazing, and we won't have it." "They're strays," the rancher replied evenly. "We'll round them up. No harm intended." But the man's eyes narrowed. "Harm's already done. You've got more stock than you can feed. Maybe it's time you sold some off, cheap." It was a threat wrapped in false kindness, and the rancher knew it. His hand twitched near his belt, though his gun remained holstered. He felt his wife's presence behind him on the porch, steady and unafraid. "We'll handle our herd," he said flatly. "You handle yours." The men lingered a moment longer, their silence heavy, before wheeling their horses and riding off. Dust trailed behind them, leaving tension clinging to the air. That night, as they sat by lamplight over supper, his wife spoke first. "They'll be back, I know," he admitted. "They see your strength as weakness, because you didn't draw your gun. But what you did today took more strength than pulling a trigger." He looked at her, searching her face. "You're not afraid." She shook her head. "Fear doesn't feed cattle or mend fences. We'll be ready." And they were. Over the next weeks, they rode the land daily, mending breaks, keeping watch. She rode beside him without complaint, her skirts catching dust, her face tanned by the sun. He began to realize she wasn't just enduring ranch life, she was thriving in it. Where he had once thought her a stranger ill-suited to the roughness of his world, she had proven herself its equal. Still, the tension mounted. One night, smoke rose in the distance. A barn belonging to a neighbor was burning. They rushed to help, but by the time they arrived, the structure had collapsed into embers. The neighbor cursed the same 3 men who had ridden to their porch. Back home, the rancher sat at the kitchen table, fists clenched. His wife poured him coffee, her touch gentle on his shoulder. "You can't fight fire with fire," she whispered. But he was weary of restraint. "If they come here, I won't let them take what's ours." Her eyes shone with quiet conviction. "And you won't stand alone." The words comforted him more than he admitted. Weeks later, the men did return. This time at dusk, when the sky was painted in blood-red streaks. They cut the fence, driving off a dozen cattle. The rancher gave chase, his wife close behind. Hoofs thundered across the fields, shouts echoing through the twilight. One man turned in his saddle, aiming a rifle. The rancher's heart seized, until his wife, riding with fierce determination, steered her horse into his, spoiling his aim. The shot went wild, cracking into the empty sky. The chase ended with the cattle reclaimed, the thieves retreating into the hills. Back at the ranch, breathless and shaken, he grabbed her hands. "You could have been killed," he rasped. Her grip tightened. "So could you. I won't watch you fall when I can stand with you." In that moment, he realized the truth he had long denied. She was not his burden, not his mistake, not even just his wife. She was his equal, his partner, the heart of his life. Summer came, hot and heavy, the land shimmering with heat. Work was endless, but so was their bond. They spent evenings on the porch, the stars wheeling above them. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of children, of growing the ranch, of planting orchards along the creek. Other times they sat in silence, their mugs clinking softly, the quiet between them deeper than words. And though the land still tested them, though danger still lurked in men and nature alike, the rancher no longer felt alone. She had shocked him at every turn, by her resilience, her laughter, her strength, her love. And every day, she continued to, in ways that reshaped not only his ranch, but his very soul. The days turned slow and golden as the summer deepened, yet beneath the brightness lay a tension neither of them could ignore. The three riders had not returned since that night, but their absence was not comfort, it was the kind of silence that waits before thunder breaks. The rancher knew it, and so did she. Every night, when they bolted the door and doused the lamps, he felt her hand find his under the covers, not out of fear, but out of certainty, as though to remind him that no storm could tear apart what they had built. When autumn returned, the ranch thrived in ways neither of them had imagined possible. Calves grew fat in the meadows, the creek ran clear and strong, and the garden she had planted blossomed with vegetables and herbs that seemed to feed not only their bodies but their spirits. Neighbors who once doubted him now came to him for advice, and when they came, they always found her at his side, her voice as respected as his. She had become the ranch's true matriarch, though she wore no crown but her sunburnt skin and dirt-stained hands. It was late one evening, the sky painted lavender and gold, when she spoke a truth that struck him silent. They were walking the fence line together, the last of the day's work behind them, when she stopped and looked across the wide land. "This ranch will outlive us," she said softly. "It will outlive the troubles, the droughts, the feuds. But it won't outlive us unless we build more than fences and herds." He turned to her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Her eyes were steady, her hand brushing her stomach almost unconsciously. "I mean children, a legacy. This place should be more than a fight to survive. It should be a home that carries us forward." The weight of her words pressed deep into him. For years, survival had been his only goal. Food on the table, cattle in the pasture, debts kept at bay. But she was right. Without her, the ranch would still be just a patch of stubborn earth. With her, it had become something greater. He reached for her hand, pressing it gently. "You've given me everything I never dared to dream," he whispered. "If God grants it, I'll welcome every child you bring into this world." And so the seasons turned again. That winter was harsh, the snow cutting deep across the plains, but the warmth inside their home never wavered. When spring came, it carried with it the cry of a newborn. Their first son was born beneath the same roof that had once felt too wide, too empty. Now it rang with life. The rancher held the boy in his arms, his hands trembling, his heart overwhelmed. His wife, pale but radiant, watched him with tears in her eyes. "You're holding the future," she whispered. The boy grew, strong and wild as the land itself, followed by a daughter 2 years later, then another son. Their house filled with laughter and small footsteps, with the clatter of wooden toys and the shrieks of play. The ranch, once a lonely monument to struggle, became a home in truth. And though the work doubled, tripled, it never felt like a burden. For every long ride, every fence mended, every calf pulled from the mud, there was her smile at the end of the day, and the sound of their children's laughter carried on the wind. But life never forgot to test them. The riders returned one summer when the children were still small. Their beards were longer, their faces harder, their intentions darker. They came at dusk, when the air was thick with heat, and this time they carried torches. The rancher heard the commotion first, the shouts, the stampede of hooves. He rushed outside to see the barn aflame, the sky filled with sparks. He grabbed his rifle, but before he could fire, a shot rang past his head. The riders circled like wolves, fire and gunpowder their weapons. His wife appeared at his side, a rifle in her hands, her face set with iron resolve. "We stand together," she said, her voice steady. They fought as one, side by side. Shots cracked through the night, torches fell to the dirt, and the cries of frightened cattle echoed into the darkness. The rancher took a bullet grazing his shoulder, but he stayed on his feet. She fired true, her aim steady, her heart unshaken. By the time the smoke cleared, 2 of the riders lay broken, the third fleeing into the hills, never to return. The barn was lost, but the ranch remained. And more importantly, so did their bond. That night, bloodied and exhausted, they sat together on the porch with their children huddled between them. The fire in the distance glowed red against the horizon, but above them, the stars burned brighter. "I thought I'd lose it all," he whispered, his arm heavy around her shoulders. "You still don't see it, do you?" she murmured, her eyes shining even in the dark. "The ranch is not the fences, not the barns, not the cattle. The ranch is us. As long as we stand, nothing is lost." Her words became the truth of their lives. Years passed, and the ranch only grew. Orchards lined the creek, cattle multiplied in the fields, and their children grew tall and strong. Neighbors no longer questioned, no longer doubted. They admired, respected, sometimes envied. Where once he had been a solitary man, broken and mistrusted, he had become something greater, a husband, a father, a leader. And through it all, she remained his compass. When drought came, she reminded him of patience. When sickness swept through the herds, she steadied his hands. When age began to bow his back and gray his hair, she held him with the same fire as when she first walked into his life, declaring herself his bride. One autumn evening, long after their children had grown and built families of their own, the rancher sat with her on the porch. Their mugs clinked together softly, the sound echoing across years of struggle and triumph. He looked at her, her hair silver now, her hands lined with years of labor, but her eyes still burning with the same light that had once shocked him into life. "Do you remember that night?" he asked, his voice rough with age. "When you stood on this porch and told me you were my bride? I thought you were mad." She laughed, the sound soft but still bright. "And now," he reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "Now I know you were the only thing that ever saved me. The only thing I ever truly needed." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Together, they watched the sun sink into the horizon, the land glowing gold one last time before the stars returned. And when the night wrapped around them, the rancher finally understood the truth. Love was not something he had chosen, not something bargained for. It had chosen him, through her, through every storm and every season. She had shocked him once with her courage, again with her love, and every day since with the depth of her devotion. The ranch would live on, carried by their children, their grandchildren, by the water in the creek and the orchards in bloom. But the heart of it, the soul of it, would always be the love they had forged together. And in that final quiet, beneath the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, the rancher knew his life was complete. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.